You're crouched in the cool dark of a cave in southern France, and the year is 1991. 60 meters of rock pressed down over your head. Your headlamp throws a small circle of light across the packed earth in front of you, and in that circle sits a bone. Somewhere behind you, water drips off a ledge in the dark, steady as a clock. You've cataloged hundreds of bones already this season. Deer, reindeer, the occasional wolf, remains from 100,000 years ago when this cave floor was someone's kitchen floor, wedged into sediment layers like pages in a book nobody has opened in a very long time. This one is different. You turn it over in gloved fingers. The cut marks are clean, deliberate, running exactly where a tendon would have been sliced through with a stone flake. You've seen 100 marks just like it on deer bone this week alone. Except this isn't deer bone. It's a rib, and it isn't from an animal at all. You sit very still, the way you do when you already suspect what you're about to find but haven't let yourself say it out loud. Whoever butchered this bone did it exactly the way they butchered the deer scattered around it. Same tools, same technique, same unhurried care. Which means the deer weren't the only thing on the menu. You are looking at the beginning of a question that has followed humans since before we were fully human at all. Why do we eat our own? And more strangely, when did we start treating it as ordinary? That bone belonged to a Neanderthal. So did 77 others found in the same cave, called Moula-Guercy, layered into rock dating back roughly 120,000 years, to a brief warm stretch between ice ages when forests crept back over the valley and the animals that lived here changed with the climate. 6 individuals in total, 2 adults, 2 teenagers, 2 children barely past toddlerhood. The excavation was led by a French archaeologist named Alban de Fleur, working with the American paleoanthropologist Tim White. What they found wasn't scattered or chaotic. It was systematic. Every long bone had been smashed open in the same place a butcher smashes bone to reach the marrow. The skulls had been broken to get at the brain. The bodies had been completely dismembered, joint by joint, exactly the way the deer in the same layer had been dismembered. Here's where it gets strange. There was no shortage of deer. If these Neanderthals had been starving, driven to the last resort by an empty landscape, you'd expect to see it in the bones around them. Instead, the cave floor from that period is full of game, reindeer, even the occasional woolly rhinoceros. Whatever pushed 6 of their own onto a butcher's table, it wasn't an empty stomach. So what was it? De Fleur himself admitted he didn't know. No ritual markings, no careful burial pose, no offering laid beside the bodies. Just the same efficient treatment given to any other carcass. It's possible violence came first and eating the dead came second, born out of hostility rather than hunger. Nobody has ever fully closed the case. What the case does prove is older and stranger than any single explanation for it. Long before modern humans existed, something in our lineage had already crossed a line most animals never approach. Eating your own kind wasn't unthinkable. It was, at least sometimes, just Tuesday. Fast forward now, not by a few centuries, by over 100,000 years. You're no longer in France. You're in England in a limestone cave carved through Cheddar Gorge, and the calendar reads roughly 14,700 years ago. The people living here belong to a culture archaeologists call the Magdalenian, and they are, by any measure, sophisticated. They carve, they engrave, they make tools with real elegance. And in this cave, a British researcher named Sylvia Bello, working out of the Natural History Museum in London, found something that should stop you cold. Human skulls, 3 of them, carefully, deliberately shaped into cups. Not smashed in panic, shaped. Cut marks across the cheeks and jaw show the soft tissue was scraped away with real precision, the tongue removed, the eyes taken out, the face and base of the skull carefully separated from the vault. Then the jagged, broken edges of the braincase were chipped smooth, almost polished, until what remained looked less like a casualty and more like a vessel. something meant to be held, maybe even to drink from. Bellow's team studied the rest of the bones too, dozens of them, and found the same pattern de Fleur had found across the sea and across 100 millennia, cut marks matching the butchery marks on the deer and horses eaten in that very cave. Human tooth marks on human bone, long bones cracked for marrow, exactly the way you'd crack open the leg of a hare. And once again, the food question comes back around. There was no famine here either. The cave floor was littered with the remains of a good hunting season, deer and horse in healthy supply. So once more, not hunger. But here's the detail that separates Gough's cave from Moula-Guercy, and it's small enough that it's easy to miss. One of the bones, a forearm, had been engraved, a deliberate zigzag pattern, cut into the surface after the flesh had already been stripped away, using the same kind of tool used to decorate antler and ivory elsewhere in the cave. Nobody engraves a discarded scrap. You engrave something that matters to you. Bellow came to a conclusion that reframes the entire story. This wasn't butchery driven by hatred, and it wasn't butchery driven by starvation. It looks like grief. A ritual carried out on the bodies of people the living once knew, turning bone into cup and cup into a way of keeping someone close instead of letting them simply disappear into the earth. Not an act against the dead, an act for them. Which brings you to the strangest, saddest, and most scientifically important chapter in this whole story, and it isn't buried in rock at all. It happened within living memory, in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, among a people called the Fore. When a member of the Fore community died, it was tradition for the family to prepare and consume the body themselves, rather than let it be buried and lost to the ground. Women in particular took on this role, along with the children in their care. It wasn't seen as horror. It was love, the same instinct that makes other cultures keep ashes on a mantle or a lock of hair in a locket, except carried to its most literal conclusion. Keep them with you. Don't let them go to waste in the dirt. By the 1950s, something was quietly, horribly wrong. People, mostly women and children, began to tremble. The shaking would start small, barely noticeable, and then spread. Coordination would fail. In its later stages, victims would sometimes break into fits of laughter that had nothing to do with joy, which is part of why outsiders came to call it the laughing sickness. Death followed always within a year or two of the first tremor. The Fore called it kuru. It means roughly to shake. An American physician named Daniel Carlton Gajdusek arrived in the late 1950s to investigate, and what he found didn't behave like any illness he recognized. No fever, no inflammation, no virus or bacteria that any test could catch, and the pattern was bizarre. It struck women and children again and again, but almost never adult men. Why would a disease choose its victims by gender and age, as if it knew something about how a household was organized? Gajdusek dug into Fore custom, and the answer landed on him with the weight of a discovery that would eventually win him a Nobel Prize. During mortuary feasts, it was the women and children who most often prepared and ate the brain, the tissue believed to carry the deepest concentration of a loved one's spirit. To prove it, Gajdusek's team took infected human brain tissue and injected it into chimpanzees, then waited. Months later, the chimps began to tremble too. It also turned out that the brain carried the deepest concentration of something else entirely, an infectious particle unlike anything medicine had confirmed before. Not a virus, not a bacterium, a misfolded protein, capable of triggering identical misfolding in every healthy protein it touched, spreading through brain tissue like a rumor nobody could stop repeating. Today, we call these particles prions, and kuru was the first disease ever traced back to one. Once the Fore stopped the practice of eating their dead in the years following the 1950s, kuru essentially vanished. The last confirmed case died in the late 2000s, more than 50 years after exposure, because the disease could apparently lie dormant in the body for decades before finally announcing itself. Here, at last, The two ends of this story reach across 120,000 years and touch. The Neanderthals at Moula-Guercy, the Magdalenians at Gough's cave, and the Fore of Papua New Guinea share almost nothing. Different continents, different eras, different beliefs entirely about what happens to a person after they die. And yet the same fundamental act keeps resurfacing across our species and its closest relatives, over and over, for well over 100 millennia. Not always born from desperation. Sometimes, provably, born from something closer to love, an attempt to hold on to someone rather than surrender them to the ground or the fire or the worms. That's the part that should genuinely unsettle you, more than any severed bone or shaped skull could on its own. We've spent so long assuming cannibalism sits at the far edge of human depravity, the last stop before a person stops being a person at all. But the evidence keeps insisting on something quieter and stranger. For a significant stretch of our history, it may have simply been one more way of saying goodbye. Which brings you back to that rib, sitting in your palm in the dark of a French cave, the cut marks catching the edge of your headlamp. You used to think a mark like this could only mean one thing: violence, desperation, the absolute worst version of what a person could do to another person. Now you're not so sure. Maybe it means exactly that here in this particular cave on this particular bone. Or maybe, 120,000 years ago, somebody knelt in this same patch of dirt, holding someone they loved, unwilling to simply let them go. Either way, the bone doesn't